In example 3, we're going to graph two full periods of y equals 5 secant of x over 3 plus 2. Thinking about back in the beginning of the graphing stuff in 4.4, what's happening to our graph? Well, the 5 in front here tells us that we're going to be stretching it by a factor of 5 vertically. This 1/3 in front of our x in the middle here tells us that we are going to be stretching it horizontally by a factor of 1/3. And then this plus 2 on the outside tells us that we're also going to be shifting our graph up by 2. Now, when we go to graph the secant graph, we're going to use the reciprocal, which is the cosine graph. So we're going to first look at y equals 5 cosine of x over 3 plus 2. And then we're going to use that cosine graph to help figure out where those asymptotes and where those U-shaped graphs are going to lie. When we fill out our table, remember we're always taking whatever that bx plus c is, this part first, and that's our key points. And those key points are the same as they were for our sine and cosine graphs, which were 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And then we're going to evaluate those on that unit circle. So now we have to fill in that cosine of x. And those values from our unit circle, the cosine of 0 is 1. The cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is -1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. And the cosine of 2 pi is 1. Now from here we have to figure out what our x values are that we're going to graph. And that means we have to take this part here, this x over 3, and then set it equal to each one of these 5 key points. So let's do that. We're going to take x over 3 and set it equal to 0. If we multiply both sides by 3, we get x is equal to 0. That's our first point. Then we're going to take that x over 3 and set it equal to pi over 2. We have to multiply both sides by 3. And that gives us x equal to 3 pi over 2. Then we're going to take our x over 3 and set it equal to pi. Multiplying both sides by 3, we get x is equal to 3 pi. Oops. Then we're going to take that x over 3 and set it equal to 3 pi over 2. So again, multiplying both sides by 3, we get x equal to 9 pi over 2. Then we're going to take our x over 3 and set it equal to 2 pi. Multiplying both sides by 3 will give us 6 pi. Then what we need to do is we need to account for our amplitude, that number that's going to vertically stretch it, which is 5. So we are going to multiply all these values by 5. So 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times -1 is -5, 5 times 0 is 0, and 5 times 1 is 5. And then our last thing to do is we have to take care of this plus 2, which is going to add 2 to our y coordinate. So now we're going to take these numbers and add 2 to them. So 5 plus 2 is 7, 0 plus 2 is 2, -5 plus 2 is -3, 0 plus 2 again is 2, and 5 plus 2 will give me 7. These are the points that we're going to graph for our cosine. So let's go and get that graphed. So on our x-axis, we're starting at 0, and then we're going up by 3 pi over 2. So 3 pi over 2, then we get to 3 pi, and then 9 pi over 2, which then brings us to 6 pi. And remember, we need 2 full periods, so we're going to add on to that as well 4 more tick marks. So then if you notice, we are counting up by 3 pi over 2. 3 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2 is the same as 3 pi. 9 pi over 2, 12 pi over 2. 12 over 2 is the same as 6. So then that will bring us to 15 pi over 2. Going up by another 3 pi over 2 would be 18 pi over 2, and 18 over 2 would be 9 pi. And then 18 plus 3 will give us 21 pi over 2. And then finally, 24 pi over 2, which is the same as 12 pi. Our graph is going all the way up to 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. And in the negative direction, we get as low as negative 3. So 1, 2, and 3. So let's graph that cosine. Let's plot those points that we have. The first point we have is 0, 7. Then we have the point 3 pi over 2, 2. Then we have the point 3 pi negative 3. 9 pi over 2, 2. And 6 pi is back at 7. So here's our one full period of our cosine graph. Again, it's got to be dotted. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back this direction. Our midline here is right here at 2. So everything's going to come back here. So if we follow our pattern, we started up, we went back to our midline, then we went down, back to our midline, then we went up. So now our next point at 15 pi over 2, we're going to be back to our midline. Then we're going to go down, back to our midline at 21 pi over 2, and then back up at 12 pi. So here's my dotted graph. And I'm going to use that to help me graph my secant value. So my secant is going to go wherever I have a point on the midline, which is at 2 now instead of 0. This is going to be where my asymptotes are. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my asymptotes in at 3 pi over 2, at 9 pi over 2, at 15 pi over 2, and at 21 pi over 2. And then remember my highest points, those are going to form my U-shapes going up, and my lowest points are going to form those U-shapes going down. Now on the ends here I only have one asymptote, so I'm only going to go up a halfway. And then I'm going to come down this way. This one goes up against both asymptotes. We come down on this one, and then I have my other half going up against my asymptote over here. If you have questions, let me know.